Welcome to Deadscape Diaries, the place where nightmares breathe, and the shadows of the unknown stretch far beyond the light. I'm your host, and tonight, we step into the darkest corners of the world, where reality is thin, and terror has no boundaries. In this desolate realm, we gather stories from those who have dared to face what lurks in the dark, and those who never came back to tell the tale. These are not just stories, they are warnings, echoes from beyond, whispers from those lost to the abyss. So, dim the lights, lock the doors, and listen closely. Because once you enter the Deadscape, there's no turning back. The Silent Watcher. The storm had arrived at dusk. Rain lashed against the windows of the old farmhouse, the kind that looked like it had been forgotten by time, as if it had been standing for centuries, waiting for something, or someone, to return. Emily stood in the dim kitchen, the sound of the storm muffling the usual creaks and groans of the house. She hadn't meant to come here. Not really. But when the letter arrived, she couldn't resist. Come back home. You need to remember. Her heart sank when she read it. It was from her estranged father, a man she hadn't spoken to in over a decade. When she arrived, the place felt wrong from the start. The air was thick with something unexplainable. A presence. Something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. But there was no one here. Not her father. No sign of anyone at all. Just a cold, unwelcoming silence. As she explored the house, it quickly became clear nothing had changed. The worn rug in the hallway. The broken mirror that had once hung above the fireplace. The strange drawings on the walls that she remembered from her childhood, her father's sketches, twisted and unfinished. But one thing was different. The door at the end of the long corridor was wide open, a door she had always been told never to go near. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, "Don't go in there. Ever. It's not safe." But now, with him gone, the door seemed to beckon her. With a pounding heart, Emily stepped toward it. The wood was old, its hinges rusted, but it opened with a groan that sent a shiver down her spine. Beyond it was a staircase leading down into darkness. The air was colder here, and the further she descended, the more oppressive the silence became. She felt like something was watching her, lurking just out of sight. At the bottom of the stairs, Emily entered a small, dimly lit room. It was filled with old furniture covered in dust, but what caught her eye was the large, leather-bound book on a pedestal in the center. She reached for it, her fingers trembling, and opened it. The pages were filled with strange symbols and ancient words. As she skimmed through them, one word kept repeating, "Watcher." Suddenly, the air grew thick with the smell of decay. Emily's breath caught in her throat as a figure stepped out from the shadows in the corner of the room. She froze. A tall, thin man with hollow eyes and a grin that was far too wide. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his hair hung in strands like wet straw. "You're not supposed to be here," he whispered, his voice like dry leaves scraping across the ground. "This is my place now." The figure reached out toward her, its fingers long and gnarled. She stumbled backward, heart hammering in her chest. But there was nowhere to run. The door had slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside. The Watcher. The book had warned her about him. He was the one who had been waiting. Waiting for someone to return, someone to remember. And now she had opened the door, She had come home, and he had been waiting for her all these years. With a flash of desperation, Emily grabbed the book and flipped through the pages, her eyes wild. There had to be something. Some way to stop him. Her gaze locked on a passage at the back, a small note written in her father's handwriting. He is the watcher of the house. You cannot escape. But you can lock him away. You must never speak his name. Never. It was too late. She had already spoken it. The watcher's grin widened, and his eyes gleamed with a dark, terrible understanding. Now you know who I am, he said, his voice turning into a low, guttural growl. And now I know who you are. You can't run. You never could. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and Emily felt her legs give way beneath her. She collapsed onto the floor, the room spinning around her. The watcher moved closer, his cold breath on her neck. His presence was suffocating, overwhelming. Every instinct in her screamed to escape, but she couldn't move. As the storm raged above her, Emily realized with growing horror that she was no longer alone. The walls of the room seemed to pulse, as if the house itself was alive, watching her. And from every corner, in the dark, unseen places, the whispers began. Remember. It was her father's voice. But it was distant, distorted, and wrong. The watcher crouched down beside her, his face inches from hers, his grin now a grotesque, lipless thing. His breath was rancid, filled with decay and death. Emily's mind raced. She remembered. She remembered the stories her father had told her, how he had tried to protect her from this. How he had failed. The Watcher wasn't just a man. He was an entity, a force tied to the house, to the land itself. And now, it was bound to her. With a strangled cry, Emily struggled to move, to push him away. But it was too late. The house creaked and groaned, the floor beneath her trembling as the darkness closed in. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the Watcher's empty eyes, filled with cold hunger. And then, silence. The storm outside subsided, and with it, the house returned to its still, silent existence. The door at the end of the corridor remained open. The Watcher still watched. And Emily was never seen again. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another journey into the darkness. The world of the Deadscape is always watching, waiting for you to return. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, be sure to subscribe and keep your lights dim and your doors locked, because you never know when the next story might be your own. Remember, in the Deadscape, there's always something more lurking just beyond the edge of your vision. And the shadows, they never forget. Until next time, keep the nightmares close. Sleep tight.